I had always loved antiques, a passion I inherited from my grandmother. On my 17th birthday, she gave me a beautiful, ornate mirror that had been in our family for generations. It was a stunning piece, standing 6 feet tall with intricate carvings of roses and vines along its golden frame. I admired its craftsmanship and placed it in my bedroom, feeling a sense of connection to my ancestors whenever I looked at it. At first, the mirror seemed harmless, even comforting. I would often catch glimpses of myself as I moved around my room, the reflection always sharp and clear. It felt like a window into the past, and I enjoyed the feeling of continuity it provided. But then, things started to change. It began with small, almost imperceptible differences. One evening, as I was brushing my hair, I noticed my reflection smiled a fraction of a second later than I did. I blinked and shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light or my imagination. However, the unsettling incidents continued. The reflection would sometimes appear slightly off, like a poorly synchronized video. My unease grew, but I convinced myself it was just stress from my upcoming exams. Yet deep down, a gnawing fear began to take root. Every time I glanced at the mirror, I felt as though I was being watched, not just by my own reflection but by something else, something malevolent. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my studies and my friends, but the mirror had a way of drawing me in. I found myself staring into it for long periods, searching for any signs of abnormality. The more I looked, the more I noticed the subtle differences. The way my reflection's eyes seemed to glint with a strange light, the almost imperceptible delay in its movements. It was as if the reflection had a life of its own, a sinister presence lurking just beneath the surface. My fascination with the mirror quickly turned into unease, and I began to dread the moments when I had to look into it. It felt like a dark force was pulling me in, whispering to me, making me question my own sanity. I knew I had to find out what was happening before it consumed me completely. The first time I saw my reflection move on its own, I was getting ready for bed. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was reaching for a towel when I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was still brushing its teeth, a few seconds behind my actual movements. I blinked hard, trying to shake off the eerie feeling, and told myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. The next incident happened a few days later. I was sitting at my desk, studying for a math test. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection in the mirror across the room. It was smiling. I wasn't. My hand holding the pencil froze, and I stared at the reflection, waiting for it to correct itself. After a moment, it did, returning to mimic my serious, concentrated expression. I laughed nervously, chalking it up to stress and lack of sleep. But the disturbances became more frequent and harder to ignore. One morning, as I was tying my hair into a ponytail, my reflection started moving out of sync again. This time, it finished the motion and then tilted its head slightly, as if observing me. My skin crawled, but I shook my head and told myself I was just imagining things. I needed to get more sleep, I told myself. I was letting my anxiety get the best of me. The most unnerving event happened one Saturday afternoon. I was trying on clothes for an upcoming school dance, twirling in front of the mirror to see how I looked. I noticed my reflection lagging slightly behind my movements again. Then, it did something that sent a chill down my spine. It waved at me, a slow, deliberate wave. I wasn't waving. I backed away from the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a delayed reaction or maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. My reflection wasn't just a reflection anymore. It seemed to have a life of its own, a sinister consciousness that was becoming more apparent with each passing day. Despite my growing fear, I tried to carry on as normal. I avoided looking into the mirror unless absolutely necessary, but even then, I could feel its presence, lurking just behind the glass. I started having nightmares, vivid and terrifying, where my reflection would step out of the mirror and take my place, trapping me inside. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and glance at the mirror, half expecting to see my reflection staring back at me with a smug, knowing smile. The more I tried to ignore it, the more intense the incidents became. I knew I couldn't keep dismissing it as stress or lack of sleep. Something was wrong with that mirror, and I needed to find out what it was before it drove me completely insane. As the days passed, my reflection's actions became more sinister and deliberate. The delay between my movements and the reflection's imitation grew longer, and it started adding variations that made my skin crawl. One evening, while washing my face, I glanced up to see my reflection staring back at me with a wide, unsettling grin. My own lips were pressed together in a thin line, and I felt a cold dread seep into my bones.
The nightmares worsened.
Each night, I was haunted by visions of my reflection stepping out of the mirror and taking my place, while I was trapped behind the glass, pounding on the surface, unable to escape. The dreams were so vivid, so real, that I often woke up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. I would lie in bed, too afraid to move, too afraid to look at the mirror, but feeling its presence nonetheless. During the day, the mirror's behavior grew more aggressive. My reflection would wave at me when I wasn't looking, or it would move out of sync, adding eerie gestures that hinted at something malevolent. One afternoon, while brushing my hair, I saw my reflection put down the brush and point directly at me. My hand froze mid-stroke, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The reflection slowly traced a finger across its throat. Its eyes locked onto mine with a menacing intensity. Panic set in. I started covering the mirror with a sheet, hoping that out of sight would mean out of mind. But even then, I felt its presence lurking behind the fabric, waiting for me to uncover it. The sense of dread was inescapable. I couldn't concentrate on my schoolwork, couldn't enjoy time with my friends. All I could think about was the mirror and the terrifying reflection that seemed to be plotting something sinister. Desperate for answers, I began researching the mirror's history. I spent hours at the library and online, digging through old records and family archives. I discovered that the mirror had once belonged to a distant relative who was rumored to be a practitioner of black magic. The more I read, the more horrified I became. Several owners of the mirror had met tragic ends, their deaths shrouded in mystery and fear. My reflection's behavior escalated. It no longer contented itself with simple gestures. It began to communicate more directly. One night, as I lay in bed, I saw the reflection mouthing words at me. I couldn't hear it, but I could read its lips. "Come closer." My heart pounded in my chest, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. When I finally gathered the courage to open them, the reflection was gone, but the terror remained. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. The mirror was more than just a piece of antique furniture. It was a gateway to something dark and dangerous. I had to find a way to break the connection, to stop the reflection before it could carry out whatever sinister plan it had in store for me. But how? The fear was overwhelming, and I felt increasingly isolated, as though the mirror was driving a wedge between me and the rest of the world. Desperation drove me to delve deeper into the mirror's history. I spent countless hours at the library, poring over old books and dusty archives. Online forums and occult websites became my nightly haunts as I searched for any scrap of information about this cursed object that had turned my life into a living nightmare. The more I uncovered, the more horrifying the mirror's past became. It had originally belonged to a distant relative of mine, a woman named Eliza, who was rumored to have dabbled in black magic. Her life was shrouded in mystery, with whispers of strange rituals and dark ceremonies that sent shivers down my spine. Eliza's fate was as grim as her reputation. She was found dead in her home, her face twisted in terror, the mirror standing ominously nearby. I traced the mirror's journey through my family tree. Each owner had met a tragic end. Unexplained accidents, sudden illnesses, suicides. The pattern was unmistakable, and it painted a clear picture of the malevolent force that resided within the mirror. It wasn't just a passive object. It was an active entity, feeding on the fear and despair of its victims. One evening, while examining the mirror closely, I discovered a small, hidden compartment in its ornate frame. With trembling hands, I pried it open and found a yellowed piece of paper inside. It was a note, written in an elegant, old-fashioned script. The message was cryptic, but the warning was clear. To whom it may concern, this mirror is a vessel of darkness, a conduit for malevolent spirits. It ensnares the souls of the living, trapping them within its reflective prison. Beware the reflection that moves on its own, for it seeks to replace you. Destroy the mirror before it destroys you. My blood ran cold as I read the words. The reflection wasn't just mimicking me. It was trying to replace me, to trap my soul in the mirror world. The note confirmed my worst fears, but it also gave me a glimmer of hope. If I could destroy the mirror, I might be able to break the curse and save myself. The reflection grew more aggressive after my discovery. It no longer confined itself to eerie gestures or delayed movements. It began to act out scenes of violence and terror. One night, I saw it pound its fists against the glass, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. Another time, it mimed choking me, its eyes filled with a cold, malevolent fury. The terror it inspired was paralyzing, but I knew I couldn't give in. I had to find a way to end this nightmare. The sense of dread was overwhelming. Every time I looked into the mirror, I could feel the reflection's hatred, its desire to trap me. It was like a living thing, pulsating with dark energy, and I felt its pull growing stronger with each passing day. The mirror had become a battleground, and my very soul was at stake. I knew I needed help. The note had given me some direction, but I was out of my depth. I reached out to an expert in the occult, a local historian who specialized in cursed objects and ancient magic. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Moore, and she agreed to meet with me after I explained my situation. With her guidance, I hoped to find a way to destroy the mirror and free myself from its grip. Dr. Evelyn Moore listened intently as I recounted the horrors I had experienced. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, never left mine. After I finished, she sat back, her face thoughtful. "The mirror is more than just a cursed object," she said. "It's a conduit for a malevolent spirit. The reflection you see is that spirit, trying to take your place in the living world." Her words chilled me, but they also gave me a renewed sense of determination. Dr. Moore explained that the mirror's power could be broken, but it would take great strength and courage. She helped me gather the necessary items: a hammer, a circle of protection made from salt, and a few ancient incantations that would weaken the spirit's hold. That night, I prepared for the final confrontation. I drew the circle of protection around the mirror and placed the hammer and the cryptic note within reach. My heart pounded as I took a deep breath and uncovered the mirror. My reflection stood there, watching me with a malevolent grin. "It ends tonight," I whispered, more to myself than to the reflection. I stepped into the circle and faced my doppelganger. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Then the reflection moved. It began to pound against the glass, its eyes wild with fury. I could feel its anger, its desperation to break free and take my place. I clenched my fists and focused on the incantations Dr. Moore had taught me, reciting them with as much strength as I could muster. The reflection screamed silently, its mouth opening in a horrific, soundless cry. The mirror shook violently, and cracks began to form along its surface. I picked up the cryptic note and read the final lines aloud, my voice trembling but determined. "This mirror is a vessel of darkness, a conduit for malevolent spirits. It ensnares the souls of the living, trapping them within its reflective prison. Beware the reflection that moves on its own, for it seeks to replace you. Destroy the mirror before it destroys you." The reflection's movements became frantic, its eyes filled with a mix of rage and fear. I grabbed the hammer, my hands shaking. Summoning every ounce of courage, I raised the hammer and brought it down on the mirror with all my might. The glass shattered with an ear-splitting crash. Shards flew in all directions, but the circle of protection kept me safe. I watched as the reflection's image fragmented and dissolved into the ether, its scream echoing faintly in the air before fading into silence. For a moment, I stood there, panting and trembling, surrounded by the broken pieces of the mirror. The malevolent presence was gone. The room felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I dropped the hammer and sank to the floor, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The curse was broken. The mirror, once a beautiful but sinister artifact, was now nothing more than a pile of shattered glass. I knew I would never be the same after this ordeal, but I had my life back. I had my freedom, and I had faced my deepest fears and emerged victorious. As I cleaned up the remnants of the mirror, I felt a sense of closure. The dark chapter of my life had ended, and I was ready to move forward, stronger and wiser. I knew that the memory of those terrifying days would stay with me, but they would no longer haunt me. The reflection was gone, and I was free.